Hey there, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. It's Cassandra from CassandraTyndall.com. And today I have a very special guest to share some of her insights and observations about lunar memory in the birth chart. So this is Elodie from House Astrology. And thanks for joining me, Elodie. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So Elodie was a contributor to Australia's WellBeing magazine. Here's the front cover. So each year we put together a publication here in Australia that has comprehensive horoscopes for all the 12 signs and a team of writers that write various topics on astrology. So Elodie, I'd love you to firstly, before we get to the contents of your article, just tell us a bit about you and how you got into astrology and the sort of astrology work that you do right now.
Okay. I was always into astrology. I think I listened to your previous interviews and I think everybody said similar thing. I was in astrology forever, like in high school. In 2013, I was studying my own birth chart and realized through my birth chart that I actually should be probably pursuing astrology as a career through understanding my own birth chart. So I decided to find a school and I officially started full-time astrology studies and then it just started from there. I made all sorts of connection with astrologers, and it's a vocation, it's a calling as opposed to career for me. That's how I see it. Beforehand, I was a cook for 20 years, but I was cooking on bush camps in remote location all through Canada. So I continued doing that until very recently, until maybe 2 years ago, and then officially just migrated to full-time astrological work in 2018, I think.
That's
so it's really calling.
Yeah, I forgot that about you in your catering history, because that was my first ever full-time job as well. Those Taurus planets, let's feed everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I cooked for big camps for reforestations, especially. So in northern Canada, there's tree planting camps, and I did that for 15 years or more. And then I did remote lodges for people who go in the Rockies, stuff like that, fighting bears, literally.
And they say Australia has
fighting bears
animals
away from my kitchen. Yeah, I mean, there's more of that, but I did that for a long time to supplement my studies and stuff, but I've been dedicating myself for the last decade to astrology studies full time, 15 I think. So I do have a consultation practice, and I also write. Sorry, my connection is not super good because I'm off grid here. So I write for Astrograph website. I write monthly horoscope, and I also write quarterly horoscope for the Mountain Astrologer magazine.
Excellent.
And I do research. Yeah.
All the things. Yeah. Horoscopes are such a undervalued tool for astrologers. You just draw so much from writing horoscopes, and it's a bit of a labor, but it's definitely so much insight and food for thought for people doing that horoscope work. So if you are learning astrology or astrology student, don't be afraid to write horoscopes. It's a valuable practice, I think, in deriving interpretations and creative writing, and also, finding a certain, dare I say, voice in astrology for yourself as well.
And predictive work too, because
exactly, trusting the tools, trusting those symbols predictively. Exactly. Love that. Okay, Elodie, so you wrote about ancient lunar calendars and the meaning of the moon in astrology. So did you want to share a little bit more about the work that you're doing with this kind of thing?
Yeah, so for the last 2 years, me and my colleague, Chris Rapucci, we've been doing research on the lunar mansion, which is a way of dividing the sky into 28 places. It's very ancient. The Chinese have their own system. The Indian Vedic system have the nakshatras. There's 27 or 28. So we've been researching that intensively. And prior to that, I was researching I was lecturing on the history of astrology, but mostly trying to conceptualize like how long has it been since we've been, watching the movement of the planets, because we always attribute that to the Greek era, Hellenistic era, but really that's very recent.
It predates that way back. Yeah.
Very much so. And so I started getting into these old lunar calendars that have been found all over the world, Australia, Europe, and they're often on bones, and that's the span is like hundreds of thousands of years. But these bones always have 28 or 29 notches. It's controversial in anthropology, but Alexander Marshak, who's an anthropologist, who's the first one who said these bones are not just like random bones. They look to be markings for the moon, cycle of the moon. So he did a lot of work with that, and I became really interested in just like trying to imagine that us as human, we've been observing basically the movement of the planets forever to contextualize our existence. But even before writing, before all of that, and probably for really important reason, like animal migration, fertility, like women's cycle, all of that. I'm reading a book right now. It's like kind of a reference book, but it's called Blood Relation, The Origin of Culture, or Menstruation and the Origin of Culture. And it's, again, anthropological work into early human and how female may have used their menstrual cycle as leverage to get meat, basically, in groups. So they would have learned to time themselves together, menstruate at the same time together, so that they would have some sort of leverage with men, and so that they could use that politically. And that's just a theory, obviously, but there's, we know that women are there's like the female cycle and the lunar cycle is very similar. And there's all sorts of correlation with the lunar cycle and the tides and all of that. So, I mean, the way we've evolved biologically is really closely linked to the movement of the moon. So there's a lot of information there.
Yes, so much so. And I think that many of the things that we might reference as old wives' tales now would hold a lot of truth to them when we go further back into history, and where did those ideas or thoughts or concepts originate from. And even though we kind of just blow them off as an old wives' tale, there will be that element of truth through history about them.
Yeah, exactly. And we just have to think about nighttime. So we have electricity now, but this is a very recent thing. And that's a whole philosophical thing that I also like to think about. What's the implication on human life now that we can have 24/7 light? What's the implication on our body, and what does that mean for the future of men? But prior to electricity, the full moon time was really significant because it's a time when it was light outside. You could have parties, you could gather, you could go hunt, you could do a lot of things. So, we've evolved to use the light of the moon also.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if you watch any show like, Vikings, Last Kingdom, because I always love that stuff, they'll always say, we'll strike at the full moon, when the light is bright at night, you know what I mean? It's just such a keeper of time in the night, right? So it would also then have a reflective, if we even think about what the moon means in astrology, right? It's memory, it's the past, it's the sort of that cellular memory that we keep,
Exactly.
I've heard of stories, a client of mine way back in the day, she'd, like, her son had a lot of mental illness, and they did a lot of like past life regression stuff on him, and through hypnotherapy they were able to, he repeated verbatim conversations that his parents had while he was in utero. Fantastic, crazy, all this sort of lunar memory, moon sort of stuff. And so obviously when the moon changes her face at night, that would have to have some reflection on our unconscious, or, the sleep state and the REM state and the dreams that we have, which is something that, the memories that we hold. And if you think about, even, I know I do this a lot myself, like the things that I think about during the day, or the things that I encounter throughout the day, will be things that I will dream about that night. And it's like somehow my lunar memory is trying to imprint something deeper inside. And so it would make, reason that the changing face of the moon each night would have an impression on our dreams in different ways. Is that something that
Yeah.
you've sort of, journaled and, studied and witnessed?
Yeah. So basically the research that we've been conducting, so this article came through just, as a side sort of thing to the project that we've been doing with we've been following the movement of the moon every night, and basically tracking where is it located, which lunar mention, which spans over usually two solar signs. So like the division of the lunar mention is a little bit smaller. So we started Google Docs, and we started tracking dreams every night, synchronicities, what appears in dreams, and also emotional state and stuff. And we accumulated a lot of data over the course of a year and a half. And what came through is that many things, and I actually have a presentation on exactly on that on lunarzodiac.com that's available. But what we realize is that the moon tends to act as a telephone line between people who belongs from the same part of the sky.
Oh, wow.
So and this is recurring, and we've involved other astrologers in the process. Eventually we had a sort of clinical period with this, because it was so recurring that we were like, okay, we need to involve other astrologers who know their astrology and start observing. But basically, let's say, the moon's in Leo tonight, for example, and I go to sleep and I dream about somebody who has important placement in Leo. So it's almost like the moon will just link up. If you, for example, have important placement in your natal chart in Leo, and somebody else, and the moon's in Leo, it just links up, and the people tend to appear in your dreams. And this is actually so recurrent that I did a whole lecture about it. If you think that the moon circulates around us through a month, so very quickly, it's the closest moving body. It moves very fast. It retains the light of the sun. So there's this kind of retentive quality also.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, this receptive memory. So it's almost like you can, if you are from a certain part of the sky, because you are, when you came, you embody a certain moment in time, which is a certain part of the sky. You can somehow, the moon can connect you and link you with other people who are also from that part of the sky. That tends to happen in dream times if you're a dreamer. Obviously, this is just like one side of this whole research project, but that's one of the things that came through that was very interesting. And it all happened in this sort of subjective dream sensation, intuition modality. It's not something that we can, look in the bright light of day and say, how does this make sense? Where's the telephone line? Show me. And that's the thing, when you deal with the lunar consciousness, it's not the solar consciousness. And we're used to filtering everything through solar consciousness. We want to rationalize things. But when we speak of lunar consciousness, we speak of sensation and intuition, which, again, in this solar society where light is on 24/7, it's becoming harder and harder to actually tune in to these sensation. And I think that's why also we say old wives' tale or superstition and stuff. There's certain predisposition that we have as human, like, let's say, like remote viewing, for example, or utilizing, different psychic tools that we have that cultures before us utilize. But because we're so solar, we're so light of day, that it's really hard for us not to access these places without, think of ourselves crazy. And that's why we say like lunatics.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's kind of reductive to that part of our brains or a part of our consciousness that we all carry and we all have, and having children, being around children, that's when you really kind of their imagination, their creativity, their dreams, and they'll wake up in the morning and they'll tell you their dreams and it's real to them, you know what I mean? And then sometimes you've got to, counsel them between, what their brains told them at night and what's happening during the day, and it happens to us as adults too, when you get, like, you have that moment where you wake up and you go, oh, that felt so real. And I mean, that's just not something that is, oh, that's just the mind playing tricks on you. That those are, or else they just wouldn't happen, right? They would have no meaning if they, if it happens, it has to have some type of meaning, if you like. And I think too, you're right in the sense that not only do we have this 24-hour light source right now, but collectively, maybe except for yourself, Elodie, being off grid, but majority of us, we have really, we're not in tune with the natural cyclic rhythms anymore.
I think, I mean, I think even I'm on the internet, like right now it's almost 10 p.m. here. I think it's like all pervasive regardless. Like we tend to idolize like the natural world, I think. But technology and 24 light is penetrating everywhere.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I'm
the modern age after all.
Yeah, I'm surrounded with cell phone towers here. Like it's just but I think fundamentally it's more about this we believe in this mythos of technology and 24/7 light, but it doesn't take away the memory that we have within us. It doesn't take away the fact that we have to sleep at night. And during sleep time, what happens, so it doesn't take away any of that, I don't think. And that's, I guess, a little bit of what interests me in talking about it, is that I want to empower people to live more sort of embodied. It's not something separate from you. It's not something like psychic sensitivity and intuition and dream time and all these lunar modalities, not something that lives outside of you. It's not something that you have to understand rationally. It's not something that you have to read in a book. And I think it's totally just about reflecting on these more natural rhythm, allow space for darkness, allow space for dream and subjectivity to filter through, and desires and all of these modes that are not rational, desires and impulse and emotions and the animal body that we are,
Yeah, it's so fascinating when you learn to trust your instinct. And it reminds me of something that my grandmother always used to say. She always says, always trust your gut, Cassie, because the mind will play tricks on you, and I think that's just such a, when we think about instinct or intuition, like it does come from sort of like a bit of a deeper place, whereas the mind can kind of get carried away, right? But, we have those situations in our life where a choice or a decision or what have you, it can defy all logic, but it's just so right, or you just can feel it, or you just know it. And, I think when you can really, as you said, embody that type of experience within yourself, then you're always true to yourself in that way.
Yeah, and it's not as complicated or daunting. That's what I was saying. It's not something outside of us. And, the moon is associated with habits and how we nurture ourselves. Like I always say, the moon is kind of like, it's like the pacifier, it's like how we pacify ourselves. So it's really about just it's the moon moves so fast that it is really what you do on a day-to-day basis. I think like you can't it's not it's not something that we need to I feel like people often are just like, oh, but it's like something I have to like make space for, whatever. But it's like you make time for sleeping, you make time for eating. These are all lunar modalities, It's more about just the realization that that's what it is. Once you start looking at the object, then it is, because it's the unconscious, it's the subjective,
Yeah, it's fascinating how much we all kind of find ourselves trying to rationalize or explain the reasons why we do it, whereas I'm sure my cats don't really think about like what they're doing next. They just operate from that space. They don't have to put any meaning or anything to it. There was one other point, sorry for that buzzing sound. We can get drone deliveries here. Like you can order like food online here and get it delivered by drone. It's so annoying.
What?
Oh, it's nothing substantial. It's probably just snacks so they can continue to play their computer games, but the buzzing. Anyway, yeah, something that you were saying about the moon being like a telephone line.
Yeah.
And one way that I often describe the moon is being like a satellite. It just constantly sort of feed, and that's what a satellite kind of does. It feeds and reflects information. So when you can kind of connect to that, you will get those signs or symbols or signals to move forward with.
Yeah, there's something really rhythmic about the moon. It's very, it's consistent, but it's inconsistent. So if you think in astrology, like the moon it's more moody, but it's also consistent. And that's the thing. I think people are afraid of the moodiness sometimes. Or it's not that we're afraid. I think it's also just like we try to keep it together, we try to control ourselves. But the moon is, if you think the lunar modalities that we're interested in exploring, like my colleague and I in our project, has a lot to do with the animal body. And the list that we're following comes from the Greek magical papyri in a specific prayer to Mene, which is so the Greek magical papyri is a bunch of old texts that's been assembled together, and there's this prayer to Mene where there's 28 animals. And so Jake Stratton-Ken, who's like a magician practitioner, associated with that list with the lunar mention. So we started working with the animals, and so every night we started to engage wherever the moon was. We started to engage with the animal associated with that place. We did a painting and channeled writing and kind of go into a trance state, into that lunar modality, to really see what kind of information we could capture from that space. And we did this repeatedly through many, many months and many lunar cycle. Every month we met the animal every day, and then again and again, and we started to really see patterns depending on the section of the skies. And so that's a way that we encourage people to kind of engage with the lunar modality, is to go into this space, child space, like you were saying, and just like drawing and just letting things filter through. But we're so judgy, we're so quick to be like, you're like, this is not exactly what I wanted to do. But if you go into this mode of this more trance mode, it's not about what you want to achieve. It's about what's filtering through. And it's surprising, if you let yourself write, or if you let yourself sing, or if you let yourself dance, you could surprise yourself at what's coming through. And that's what the creative act is.
Yeah. I really like what you said about understanding the moon is consistent with her inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, I find myself, obviously I'm a Cancerian, so understanding that within myself has been a really big part, but also with my clients, that, when you can understand that, you have this, range within, that you will operate from, maybe like really productive or really efficient to lazy, just eating all the food and watching all the TV. When you can understand this is sort of like the range that you operate with, and you will fluctuate within that range. And when I was in Seattle a couple of years ago, a dear friend of mine who will be coming up for an interview soon, we were doing this beach walk, and I forget what the name of the place was, but they did have some zodiac symbols in the footpath or the pavement along the way. And then they had a crab, and it said something along the lines of, the tide doesn't go up and down, it comes in and it goes out. And I thought that was really beautiful for Cancer, because we always get this reductive description of being moody, like up and
Yeah.
down, up and down. But it's no, we flow in and we flow out, you know, and it's kind of this spiraling action, you know, and it's the tides, you know, when is it high tide? When is it low tide? Like you never know what you're going to get, but it's always consistent that you never know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? And when you can work with that and maybe track these lunar cycles that you're talking about, and you can get that more understanding about, or maybe even not understanding, but just acceptance of that flow, you know?
Yeah, I think there's something about acceptance, because maybe also we all deal with Saturn, we all deal with time passing and responsibilities, so we can't completely be eternal child forever.
Why not?
But but there's something about, you know, people who are born, for example, with the moon rising, who really struggle to manage their emotion. They have this like, oh, it's just coming on me, and then, oh, I'm okay now, or whatever, you know, there's this. And that's the thing, is we want predictability and we want consistency, but that's actually the consistency. The consistency is that nature is changing, everything is changing all the time.
Yeah.
And so is our emotional state, you know.
Yeah.
So we try to apply a lot of rigidity, I think, to something that is the opposite of that. And I think leaning into that actually allows for creativity. And if you think of the moon as the womb and the uterus and whatever else, also, you know, like the whole relation to memory and generations and stuff like that, it opens up a whole other space for things to filter through and inform you through, not through like textual evidence, but through your own knowing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways I really sort of describe the like lunar consciousness as opposed to the solar is that solar feels more like causation, whereas moon is a little bit more like correlation. Like I can't explain how this thing works, but my experience is this, or I've noticed that. And it's like this kind of connecting the dots, but there'll always be things that are inconsistent. So, you know, in some of, you know, what I do on the side, like in training, powerlifting and things like that. And when you're trying to create, like whether it's, you know, a certain calorie content, or you're trying to measure certain things, it's the mode of measurement doesn't really matter. It's as long as you're using a consistent template, somehow along the line, it'll all wash out kind of thing. And I think the moon is a bit like that in the consistent inconsistencies, you know, when you can understand there's certain things that are random or certain things that don't make sense, then you'll be able to kind of like move with those tides in a way, and maybe like swim with the stream as opposed to trying to swim against the tide and lose all your energy. Like there's something really kind of, I don't know, like primordial about it. And
yeah, absolutely,
you know,
that's the right word. I think that's the correct word.
yeah. And I think that's you know, when I'm teaching and I'm talking about the 12th house versus the first house, when you think about being in utero, it's a space you can never go back.
Yeah.
You know, once that baby is born, you can't put it back. And I think in some ways the lunar memory stuff is this trying to connect to something that we can totally never go back to, but we can embody or experience and remember in other ways, you know. And this my background is Scandinavian, you know, ancestrally, and in you know, one of the kind of Nordic philosophies through the reincarnation is the concept of huminga and remembering. You know, so much is about remembering. And so when you're talking about the markings on the bones and the way people in the ancient world were buried, and you go back to those places and you dig up those bones, or you dig up the belongings of the dead. Of course, it's Scorpio season, so we're going to go there. And it's Halloween this weekend. But everything is about remembering, you know, something from the flesh body that helps to remember the soul body. I mean,
and I think it's all there too. And that's the other thing that kind of transpired through our research, is that it seems that you know, the sub layer, when we think like the moon crosses, you know, around us. It's in a sublayer, and it seems that everything that resides in this sublayer, and the moon is also associated with like the organic life and growth and all of these, like, and also, you know, everything that's in the earth. So there's something very like organic, biological about the moon. So we can talk about like natal astrology and where the moon is in your birth chart and how it, you know, how moody or not you are. But also we can just kind of separate a little bit from natal astrology and just think about the moon, like what is the moon? And then bring it back to your birth chart, because literally when you were born, the moon was in a certain part of the sky. It was like phoning in a certain part of the sky and everything that's so associated with that part of the sky, like all of the other planets, but the moon is closer to home.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
literally, you know?
Yeah.
So whatever part of the sky the moon is in tends to filter this whole experiential layer. There's this whole experiential layer, but it's very quick. Like the moon moves really fast. It's like it's continuous. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why dreams, you wake up in the morning and you're like, I dream about that, and then you remember when you first wake up, and then like later in the day you try to remember your dream and it's completely gone.
Yeah.
But it's somewhere, it's residing somewhere in the lunar consciousness, in the darkness, you know.
So fascinating.
The lunar modes.
Yeah, the moon is, I think, such an underrated dynamic in the work that we do, and I think it just gets a little bit reduced or simplified, and it's just so many levels to the moon. And yeah, I guess us with our Venus ruled moons, we could connect over this for forever.
Yeah, absolutely. But like it just basically translates every other planets, like in any types of astrology. It's the translator of light, and it's the connector.
And when you talk about that sort of ancient model of the spheres, you know, we sort of come down the planets, and the moon's the sort of that, you know, embodiment of the flesh in a sense. And so the moon is going to describe, you know, what the flesh needs in some respects as well, you know.
And it makes things happen too. So if you think like more astrological magic or electional astrology, nothing happens without the moon. So, you know, it brings it together.
It's manifesting in a way.
Yeah, it's manifesting, exactly. So that's why when we talk about the like sub-lunar layer, it's like a very material sort of embodied experience.
Yeah. So juicy. Oh my God, we could talk about this.
It is. The moon is very juicy, I think.
I love it, Elodie. Well, your article was so evocative, so creative, and so imaginative. So thank you so much for this fabulous piece of writing. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is available on this in this magazine. I'll put all the links in the description below where you can buy a hard copy. And of course, the digital copy is available if you're thinking, I can't wait to have this sent out to me. I need to read Elodie's article right now. You could get that instant gratification, which the moon sometimes also likes too.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Elodie. We should do this more often for sure. And I'll also put some details of where you can connect with Elodie, learn more about your own moon and all of the work that she does in respect to this. So they can find you on your website. Do you have a website, Elodie?
Yeah. So I have a website, houseastrology.com. And also I write for Astrograph, and the lunar research that I'm doing in tandem with my colleague can be found at lunarzodiac.com.
Fantastic. And of course, you're on Instagram too. We connect there sometimes.
9 House Astrology. Yeah. I chose the worst name for my business, but it's too late now.
Oh, well, it is what it is. It's a great name. Yep. Okay. All right, then, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you found some of these moon insights with Elodie really useful and thought-provoking. So until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks for coming, Elodie.
My pleasure. Thank you.